I never thought I'd stand up at my daughter's wedding rehearsal dinner and expose the truth about my ex-husband's finances. The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. Robert's company isn't struggling. MillerTech Solutions was valued at $14.7 million last quarter. The room fell silent. Every face turned toward Rob, whose smug smile had instantly vanished. After 12 years of watching him dodge financial responsibilities while our daughters and I struggled, something inside me finally broke, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Diane Miller, and for 15 years, I believed I was in a partnership. A real marriage where sacrifices were shared and dreams were built together. I met Robert during my final year of accounting school. He was charming, ambitious, and talked about building a future together, one where we'd both succeed. He had just started a small tech consulting company and needed someone who understood numbers. I became that person, putting my own career plans on hold to help him build his dream. When our first daughter Jessica was born, we decided I would stay home while Rob focused on growing MillerTech Solutions. "It's an investment in our future," he'd say, squeezing my shoulder as he headed out for another late night at the office. "Soon we'll both reap the rewards." I believed him because that's what marriage was supposed to be, a partnership. By the time Hannah came along 3 years later, Rob's business was gaining traction. We moved from our modest starter home to a beautiful house in Northbrook with a backyard that backed up to a small creek. The girls had their own rooms with hand-painted murals I spent weeks perfecting. I still remember the pride in Rob's voice when he'd bring clients over for dinner. "My wife gave up her career to make all this possible," he'd tell them, as if my sacrifice was just another asset in his portfolio. I didn't see it that way then. I thought we were building something together. The first sign that Rob's vision of our partnership differed from mine came when Jessica was in 2nd grade. I mentioned returning to work part-time, finishing my CPA certification that I'd abandoned to help him launch the company. "Why would you want to do that?" he asked, genuinely confused. "We don't need the money, and the girls need you here." "It's not about the money," I tried to explain. "It's about having something of my own." He nodded as if he understood, but the subject was somehow always deferred. There was always a reason why now isn't a good time. His business was at a critical growth stage. The girls had too many activities. My role supporting him was too valuable. 10 years passed, and I became increasingly invisible. Rob's company expanded to 3 offices across the Midwest. Our home became a showcase for his success, with dinner parties for clients and industry colleagues where I played the perfect hostess, while discussions about business strategy, discussions I was once central to, happened around me rather than with me. "Mom," 12-year-old Jessica asked me one evening after a particularly lavish client dinner, "why does Dad never mention that you helped him start the company?" She'd overheard him telling the creation story of MillerTech Solutions as if he'd built it single-handedly. I smiled and tucked her into bed. "That's just how Dad remembers it now," I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. Sometimes people rewrite history to fit who they've become. The breaking point came during a vacation in Florida when the girls were in middle school. While Rob was on a conference call, Jessica found his laptop open to an email about acquiring another company. The projected revenue numbers caught her eye, far larger than what Rob had been telling me when I asked about company finances. "Dad's company must be doing really well," she said innocently at dinner. "That acquisition email said the combined revenue would be over $8 million. Rob's face darkened. He closed Jessica down immediately, telling her she'd misunderstood what she'd seen and that it was inappropriate to snoop on business matters. Later, I overheard him scolding her. "We don't discuss family finances with anyone, understand? Not even with Mom. Business is complicated." That night in our hotel room, I confronted him. Why are you hiding the company's success from me? We built this together. We? He laughed, a sound I'd never heard from him before. Diane, let's be real. You helped with some bookkeeping 15 years ago. I've built this company through my own sweat and sacrifice while you've been comfortably raising our kids in a beautiful home I provide. His words struck me like physical blows. The partnership I thought we had existed only in my mind. 6 months later, I found the texts between Rob and Victoria, his VP of sales. The divorce was ugly but quick. Rob had prepared financial accounts I didn't know existed, company ownership structured to minimize what I could claim, and a prenup I'd signed in the whirlwind days before our wedding that limited my stake in the business to the years I'd actively worked there. The settlement left me with the house in Northbrook, which needed a mortgage to buy out Rob's share, primary custody of the girls, and child support that always seemed to arrive with complications. Meanwhile, Rob moved to a lakefront property in Lake Forest with Victoria, started driving a new Tesla, and somehow always had a reason why business was going through a rough patch whenever exceptional expenses for the girls came up. I found myself at 42, with 2 teenage daughters, a half-finished accounting degree, and the dawning realization that I'd spent my adult life building someone else's dream while neglecting my own. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, someone whose confidence had been slowly drained over decades of being told her contributions didn't really matter. "You need to finish your degree," said my friend Pam over coffee one morning, 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Pam and I had known each other since college, but our friendship had dwindled during my marriage. Now, she was my lifeline. "The girls are old enough now. It's your turn, Diane." The thought terrified and exhilarated me. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college while working as a bookkeeper during the day. The first semester was brutal. My brain felt rusty, my confidence non-existent. I'd sit in advanced accounting, surrounded by students half my age, fighting the voice in my head, which sounded suspiciously like Rob, telling me I didn't belong there. But something unexpected happened. Numbers still made sense to me. In fact, they made more sense than ever because now I understood the stories behind them, how financial statements revealed not just profits and losses, but values and priorities. My experience as a mother who managed a household budget through lean times gave me insights my younger classmates lacked. By the time I finished my degree 2 years later, I'd been hired as an adjunct instructor at the same community college. Teaching basic accounting to business students became my unexpected passion. Financial literacy is power, I'd tell my students, particularly the young women. Never let anyone keep you in the dark about money, especially your own. Meanwhile, Rob's support payments became increasingly erratic. There was always a reason: market downturns, temporary cash flow issues, unexpected business expenses. The girls felt it. Jessica had to drop horseback riding lessons she loved because I couldn't cover the cost when Rob's contribution didn't arrive. Hannah needed a laptop for high school, which became a 3-month battle of emails and texts before Rob finally sent half the amount. "But Dad just took Victoria to Paris," Jessica said, scrolling through her phone where Victoria had posted lavish photos of their anniversary trip. "How can he say he doesn't have money for my college visits?" I tried to shield them from the financial reality, but teenagers see everything. They watched me clip coupons and pick up extra courses to teach while their father's life appeared to grow more luxurious by the year. The cognitive dissonance was impossible to ignore. "Your father loves you," I would say whenever they expressed anger or confusion. His relationship with money is complicated. But privately, I seethed at the injustice. Not just for me, but for our daughters who were learning painful lessons about how little their father valued his promises. When Jessica got accepted to Northwestern University, her dream school, the celebration was short-lived. The financial aid package wasn't enough, and my teacher's salary couldn't cover the gap. According to our divorce agreement, Rob was supposed to pay half of the girls' college expenses. But when I called to discuss Jessica's tuition, he was ready with excuses. "The business is going through a restructuring," he said, his voice distant. "I can commit to covering her dorm fees, but tuition is impossible right now. Maybe she should consider community college for 2 years. It was good enough for you, right?" The dismissive tone in his voice ignited something in me. A slow-burning determination that had been building since the divorce. I wasn't going to let him diminish Jessica's dreams the way he'd diminished mine. "I'll figure it out," I told Jessica. That night, as we sat at our kitchen table, the acceptance letter between us. "You're going to Northwestern." And I did figure it out. Second mortgage, extra teaching load, and a weekend bookkeeping job for small businesses. Jessica thrived at Northwestern, majoring in engineering and meeting Tyler Matthews in her junior year. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first time she brought him home, I saw how he looked at her, with respect and genuine interest in her thoughts. It was how I'd once thought Rob looked at me. Tyler proposed on Jessica's graduation day. As they began planning their wedding, I started setting aside what I could. A wedding fund had been part of the divorce agreement, another responsibility split equally between Rob and me. But I harbored no illusions about his willingness to contribute. That brings me to last spring, when Jessica and Tyler set a date for their October wedding at Lakeshore Gardens. I'd visited the venue with them, wincing at the price tag, but keeping my concerns hidden. This was Jessica's day, and after watching her father prioritize his new family for years, I was determined to give her the celebration she deserved. "Dad says he'll cover his half," Jessica told me after calling to tell him about the venue. "He said business is finally turning around." I nodded, not wanting to cast doubt, but making a mental note to arrange a payment plan with Lakeshore Gardens just in case. Experience had taught me to prepare for Rob's promises to evaporate when it came time to write a check. What I didn't know then was that Rob's empty promises about Jessica's wedding would be the final straw, the moment when 12 years of financial manipulation would collide with a mother's determination to protect her daughter's happiness, creating a public reckoning no one at the rehearsal dinner would ever forget. 3 months before Jessica's wedding, I met with Andrea, the wedding planner at Lakeshore Gardens. We sat at a small table overlooking Lake Michigan, the October venue already taking shape in my mind. White chairs arranged in neat rows facing the water, an arbor draped with Jessica's chosen colors of burgundy and blush, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over everything. It would be perfect. "So we'll need the first payment of 40% by next week to secure the date," Andrea said, sliding a contract across the table. "The remaining balance will be due 30 days before the wedding." I nodded, mentally calculating how much I could put on my credit card versus what needed to come from my savings. "My ex-husband will be covering half," I said. "Can we arrange for separate payments?" Andrea's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I recognized that look, the one professionals get when they hear, "My ex will pay for part of this," and mentally prepare for complications. "Of course," she said smoothly, "but we'll need both payments to consider the date secured." "I understand. I'll make sure it happens." Later that afternoon, I called Rob to discuss the payment timeline. It went straight to voicemail, as usual. I left a message outlining the details, my voice carefully neutral. After years of financial negotiations with my ex-husband, I'd learned that any hint of emotion, urgency, annoyance, even excitement, gave him leverage he would inevitably use against me. Rob didn't call back for 3 days. When he did, he was driving somewhere, his voice echoing through his car's Bluetooth system. "Hey, I got your message about Jessica's wedding venue," he said without preamble. "Look, the timing is tough. We're about to close a major acquisition, and all my liquid assets are tied up." My stomach tightened. I'd heard variations of this excuse dozens of times over the years. The venue needs the deposit next week, Rob. We agreed on this amount months ago when Jessica first got engaged. I know. But business deals don't follow our personal timelines, Diane. You know how it works. The condescension in his tone was palpable, as if he were explaining business to a child. Can you cover it for now? I promise I'll reimburse you before the final payment. I closed my eyes, counting silently to 10. This is Jessica's wedding, not some last-minute expense that caught us by surprise. And I want it to be perfect for her. But I'm in a temporary cash crunch. It happens in business. The familiar pattern unfolded exactly as it had countless times before. I would cover Rob's share to keep things moving forward. He would promise to reimburse me. The reimbursement would be delayed, reduced, or somehow complicated by new conditions. In the end, I would absorb the cost while Rob claimed circumstances beyond his control. Not this time. I can only cover my half, Rob, I said firmly. Jessica is meeting with the venue tomorrow to go over details. I suggest you call her directly if you can't fulfill your commitment. Silence filled the line for several seconds. Are you seriously going to make me disappoint our daughter? That's low, Diane, even for you. The irony of his accusation might have made me laugh if I weren't so angry. I'm not making you do anything. I'm simply holding you to the agreement we made. The same agreement you made with Jessica when she showed you the venue. Fine, he snapped. I'll figure something out. But I want it noted that you're putting me in an impossible position during a critical business phase. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking slightly. Standing up to Rob still rattled me, even after all these years. Part of me wanted to give in, to charge my credit card to the limit just to keep the peace. But a stronger voice, the voice of the woman who had rebuilt her life after divorce, reminded me that this was exactly how Rob had controlled me for years, by making his problems my responsibility. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Just left meeting with Andrea. Dad sent the deposit. Wedding officially booked. I stared at the message, surprise mingling with suspicion. Rob had actually come through? Maybe he was finally taking his responsibilities seriously. Or perhaps, a more cynical part of me suggested, he simply didn't want to look bad in front of the wedding planner. The deposit question settled. Wedding preparations shifted into high gear. Jessica and Tyler moved forward with selecting a caterer, photographer, and band. I threw myself into helping with whatever they needed, while teaching summer courses to build up my savings for the remaining expenses. It was during this busy period that Tyler's mother, Eleanor Matthews, entered the picture more prominently. Eleanor had been widowed young and raised Tyler alone while building a successful interior design business. From the moment we met, I sensed a kindred spirit, another woman who understood what it meant to rebuild a life around children's needs while pursuing professional goals. Jessica tells me you teach accounting, Eleanor said when we met for lunch to discuss wedding details. After being the behind-the-scenes bookkeeper for your ex's company, that must have been quite a transition. I was surprised by her directness, but also refreshed by it. It was terrifying at first, I admitted. Going back to school in my 40s, sitting in classrooms with kids barely older than my daughters, but it was also the most empowering thing I've ever done. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. I started my business when Tyler was 4, working out of my garage with a borrowed drafting table. The first time I presented designs to a real client, I was so nervous I forgot my own name. We laughed, and for the first time in ages, I felt truly seen by someone who understood the complexity of my journey, not just as Jessica's mother or Rob's ex-wife, but as a woman who had found her own path. As we finished lunch, Eleanor said something that stayed with me. Our children learn more from watching us overcome challenges than they ever learn from our successes. Your daughters have had a front row seat to your resilience, Diane. That's a powerful gift. Her words echoed in my mind as wedding preparations continued. Jessica and Hannah had indeed watched me struggle and rebuild after the divorce. They'd seen me return to school, launch a new career, and manage our household on a fraction of our previous income. Had that been a gift amid all the hardship? I wanted to believe it was. 2 months before the wedding, the next payment to Lakeshore, Gardens came due. Once again, I reached out to Rob to coordinate. This time, he answered on the second ring. "Diane, I was just about to call you," he said, his voice unusually cheerful. "Good news. That acquisition I mentioned is finally moving forward. The timing's still tight with the wedding, but things are looking up." "That's great," I said cautiously. "So you'll have your half of the next venue payment by the 15th? "Well, not exactly. The deal won't fully close until after the wedding. But once it does, I'll be in a much stronger position financially." My caution hardened into familiar disappointment. "Rob, we need to make this payment now, not after the wedding." I know. Look, I've been thinking, why don't I handle the rehearsal dinner instead? The venue payment is pretty steep, but I could cover a nice dinner at Giuseppe's. Their private room is perfect." I pressed my fingers against my temple, feeling a headache forming. That wasn't our agreement. The rehearsal dinner is traditionally covered by the groom's family anyway. Eleanor has already offered to host it. "Well, plans change. I'm trying to be flexible here." His voice took on the wounded tone he always used when called out on his maneuvering. "You act like I'm trying to get out of contributing, when I'm simply suggesting a different way to help." The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Rob promising to figure something out about the venue payment, the same vague assurance that had preceded countless disappointments over the years. That evening, Jessica called, her voice tight with concern. "Mom, Dad just called me about the wedding payments. He says you're being inflexible about how he contributes. Is everything okay?" My heart sank. So this was Rob's new strategy, going directly to Jessica to pressure me through our daughter. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to burden her with adult problems during what should be a joyful time. "Your dad and I are just working out the details," I said. "Don't worry about it." "But he said you're insisting he pay for things a certain way, even though he's offered alternatives. He sounded really upset." I took a deep breath. "Jessica, when we divided responsibilities for your wedding, your father agreed to cover half, the venue cost. I'm simply asking him to honor that commitment. He says his business is having cash flow issues right now." Jessica's voice held a note of defense that cut deep. Even after all these years, part of her still wanted to believe in her father, to see him as the successful businessman whose priorities inevitably included her. "I understand that businesses have ups and downs," I said gently, "but your wedding date has been set for months. This payment shouldn't be a surprise." "Maybe I should have picked a less expensive venue," she said quietly. And there it was. The guilt that Rob had expertly transferred from himself to our daughter. Jessica was now blaming herself for choosing a venue that her father, with his supposedly struggling business, couldn't afford. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "You chose a beautiful place that's perfect for your wedding. This is not your problem to solve, sweetheart. Your dad and I will figure it out." After hanging up, I sat on my back porch, watching darkness settle over the yard where my daughters had played as children. Anger burned inside me, not just at Rob's manipulation, but at myself for still allowing it to affect our family after all these years. The next day, I made a decision. I would cover Rob's portion of the venue payment, not because he deserved the bailout, but because Jessica deserved a wedding untainted by financial stress and parental conflict. I would find a way to make it work, even if it meant taking on extra courses or dipping into my retirement savings. What I didn't expect was for Hannah, my younger daughter, to be the one who changed everything. Hannah had always been more outspoken than her sister, less willing to smooth over family tensions. At 22, She was finishing her bachelor's degree in business administration with a fierceness about financial independence that I recognized as a direct response to watching her parents divorce. She stopped by my house unannounced one evening, letting herself in with her key and finding me at the dining table, surrounded by budget spreadsheets. "Jessica told me Dad's flaking on the wedding payments," she said without preamble, dropping her backpack on a chair. "And now you're trying to figure out how to cover for him. Again." I looked up, startled by her directness. "I'm just exploring options." Hannah sat down across from me, pushing aside some papers to make room for her elbows. "Mom, I'm taking corporate valuations this semester. For our final project, each student has to research a mid-sized private company and estimate its worth. Based on publicly available information." I nodded, not sure where she was going with this. "Guess which company I chose?" My eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Hannah, you didn't." "I did." She pulled her laptop from her backpack and opened it. "MillerTech Solutions, Dad's pride and joy. Is that ethical? Using your father's company for a school project?" Hannah shrugged. "It's a private company, but there's plenty of public information available if you know where to look. SEC filings from when they almost went public 3 years ago, business news coverage of their acquisitions, LinkedIn employee counts, industry standard multiples." She turned the screen toward me. "Want to see what your finance major daughter learned about her father's struggling business?" Against my better judgment, I leaned forward. The spreadsheet on Hannah's screen was meticulously organized, with tabs for revenue estimates, asset valuations, and competitor comparisons. I might have been out of the corporate accounting world for years, but I still knew how to read financial projections. "This can't be right," I murmured, scrolling through the numbers. "These revenue figures are accurate within a 5% margin of error, according to my professor," Hannah finished. "MillerTech did $26.4 million in revenue last year. Their acquisition of Summit Consulting added another $8 million in annual recurring revenue, and they're planning to open an office in Nashville next quarter." I stared at the screen, memories flooding back of the early days when I'd managed MillerTech's books from our spare bedroom, dreaming with Rob about reaching just $1 million in annual revenue someday. "How do you know about the Nashville office?" I asked. Hannah smirked. "Victoria's son Brady is in my program. He likes to brag about his stepdad's company when he's had a few drinks. Apparently, Rob's flying down next week to sign the lease on a sick downtown office space." The pieces clicked into place. The frequent trips Rob mentioned when rescheduling visits with the girls, the business lunches that always seemed to run long, the constant refrain of cash flow issues despite clear signs of expansion. "Mom," Hannah said, her voice gentler now, "MillerTech Solutions isn't struggling, based on standard industry multiples. For tech consulting firms, it's worth between $14 and $16 million, conservatively." I let that number sink in. $14 million. The company I'd helped launch from our guest room, the one whose first client contracts I'd drafted at our kitchen table while 8 months pregnant with Jessica, was now worth more than I would earn in several lifetimes as a community college instructor. And Rob was claiming he couldn't contribute $15,000 toward his daughter's wedding. Hannah reached across the table and closed her laptop. "You don't have to cover for him anymore, Mom, and Jessica deserves to know the truth." I shook my head, slowly. "It's her wedding, Hannah. I don't want to ruin it with more family drama." "It's already ruined if she believes her father can't afford to contribute." Hannah's voice rose with frustration. "Jessica scaled back her guest list because Dad made her feel guilty about the cost. She's not getting the band she wanted because she's trying to be reasonable about expenses. Meanwhile, he and Victoria are renovating their lake house with a wine cellar that costs more than this entire wedding." I knew Hannah was right, but years of keeping the peace for my daughter's sake had become a hard habit to break. "Let me think about how to handle this," I said finally. Hannah stood up. gathering her things. At the door, she turned back with a determined expression that reminded me painfully of my younger self. Just remember, Mom, you taught us both that financial transparency is about respect. When someone hides money facts from you, they're not protecting you. They're controlling you. My own words, spoken in countless classroom lectures, now came back to challenge me. What message was I sending my daughters by continuing to cover for Rob's financial manipulations? What lesson would they carry into their own marriages and careers? The answer came to me with startling clarity. By protecting Rob from consequences, I wasn't shielding Jessica from pain. I was teaching both my daughters that a man's pride was more important than a woman's financial security. That deception was acceptable if it preserved appearances. That their mother's sacrifice was expected, while their father's responsibility was optional. Not the legacy I wanted to leave them. Not even close. The next morning, I called Jessica and asked her to meet me for coffee at Morning Brew, our favorite cafe. As we sat at a corner table, steam rising from our mugs, I chose direct honesty over comfortable evasion. Sweetheart, there's something important we need to discuss about your wedding budget, I began. I've made a decision. I'll be covering the remaining venue payments myself. Jessica started to protest, but I held up my hand. This isn't a sacrifice for me. It's a gift I want to give you. Your wedding day should be exactly what you and Tyler want it to be. Relief softened her features, quickly followed by concern. But what about Dad? He keeps saying he'll figure something out. I took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived. Jessica, your father's business isn't struggling the way he's led you to believe. MillerTech is actually doing very well. Her brow furrowed. How do you know that? Dad says they've had cash flow issues all year. Carefully, without revealing Hannah's research project, I explained what I'd learned about MillerTech's recent acquisitions and expansion plans. As I spoke, Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to hurt, and finally to a quiet anger I recognized all too well. So he lied. Again. She stirred her coffee absently. Why am I not surprised? People have complicated relationships with money, I said, trying to be fair despite everything. Your father built that company from nothing. In his mind, its success belongs to him alone. But he's my father. This is my wedding. Jessica's voice cracked slightly. How could he pretend he couldn't afford it when he's opening new offices and renovating his house? I reached across the table and took her hand. That's a question only he can answer. But I want you to know that your wedding doesn't have to be scaled back because of money concerns. If you want the band you originally chose, or anything else you've compromised on, we can make it happen. Jessica squeezed my hand, tears shimmering in her eyes. I don't understand why he does this. It's like he wants me to feel guilty for asking him to be a father. The raw hurt in her voice broke my heart. After years of protecting my daughters from the full truth of their father's behavior, I realized that my silence had only prolonged their pain. They were adults now, facing the reality of who Rob was with or without my sheltering. Your father loves you, I said softly, but love and responsibility don't always align as they should. What matters now is that you have the wedding you've dreamed of, without financial stress clouding the day. Jessica wiped away a tear, her jaw setting in a determined line I recognized from my own mirror. I'm going to talk to him. He needs to be honest with me, at least this once. I hesitated, knowing how these confrontations with Rob typically ended, with the other person somehow apologizing to him. Are you sure that's what you want? She nodded firmly. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about respect. If he can't be honest with me about this, how can I trust him to walk me down the aisle? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. In all our wedding discussions, Jessica's plan to have Rob walk her down the aisle had been a given. An honor I'd never questioned despite our complicated history. Now she was reconsidering even that traditional father's role. As we left the cafe, Jessica hugged me tightly. "Thank you for always being straightforward with me, Mom. Even when the truth is hard to hear." Her words stayed with me all day, a validation of the painful honesty I'd finally chosen over comfortable pretense. Whatever happened next with Rob, I knew I'd done the right thing by my daughter, not by protecting her from difficult truths, but by trusting her to handle them with the strength she'd inherited and the resilience she'd learned. In part, by watching me rebuild my own life. What I didn't anticipate was that Jessica's conversation with her father would set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in the most dramatic rehearsal dinner Lakeshore Gardens had ever hosted. A night when 12 years of financial deception would finally be exposed, not by me, but by the consequences of Rob's own choices. Jessica called her father the next day. She didn't tell me much about their conversation, just that it didn't go well, and that she needed time to process things. For the next week, she threw herself into wedding details with a new intensity, as if perfecting centerpieces and finalizing playlists could somehow compensate for the fresh wound in her relationship with Rob. I gave her space, remembering my own complicated grief after finally accepting that my marriage had been built on illusions. Some realizations need to be processed alone before they can be shared. 10 days after Jessica's conversation with Rob, I received a call from Andrea at Lakeshore Gardens. "Mrs. Miller," she began, her professional tone tinged with awkwardness. "I wanted to let you know that we received a partial payment from Mr. Miller yesterday." I blinked in surprise. "He made a payment?" "Yes, though it's only about 40% of his expected contribution. He included a note saying the remainder would come after his business situation improves." The skepticism in her voice was barely concealed. After thanking Andrea and ending the call, I sat in my kitchen, turning this new development over in my mind. Rob's partial payment wasn't like him. He typically either fulfilled financial obligations completely or avoided them entirely. This half measure suggested he was feeling pressure. From Jessica? From his own conscience? It seemed unlikely. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Have you seen Victoria's Instagram story? Screenshot attached." I opened the image Hannah had sent. It showed Victoria standing in what appeared to be a construction site, wearing a hard hat and holding blueprints. The caption read, "Breaking ground on the Nashville office. MillerTech expansion, share business wife life." So much for the cash flow problems. I forwarded the screenshot to Jessica without comment, then went back to grading papers from my summer accounting class. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Jessica, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I saw the Nashville office photo," she said without preamble. "Dad told me last week that they were putting the expansion on hold because of financial constraints, the same constraints preventing him from contributing fully to the wedding." "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "Don't be. I'm done making excuses for him." Her voice hardened with resolution. I called him again after seeing that photo. Do you know what he said? That business investments and personal expenses are different categories, and I shouldn't conflate them. The typical Rob response, reframe the conversation to make the other person seem financially naive. "What did you say?" I asked. I told him that his daughter's wedding isn't a personal expense like a vacation or a new watch. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event that he committed to supporting. She paused, and I could hear the hurt beneath her anger. "He said I was being emotional, and that when I'm running my own business someday, I'll understand prioritization." My grip tightened on the phone. After years of protecting Rob from the full consequences of his actions, of making excuses to our daughters for his behavior, something in me snapped. "Jessica, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. Your father's relationship with money has never been about actual limitations. It's about control. He uses financial uncertainty to maintain power over situations and relationships." Silence filled the line for several seconds. Then, in a small voice, Jessica asked, Is that why you stayed so long? Because he controlled the money? The question pierced straight to the heart of something I'd never fully articulated, even to myself. Partly, I admitted, but it was more complicated than that. I believed we were building something together, a family, a future. By the time I realized your father saw me as an accessory to his success, rather than a partner in creating it, I was deeply entangled financially and emotionally. I've been thinking about the aisle, Jessica said after another pause, about who should walk me down it. I held my breath, not wanting to influence what I knew was a painful decision. I want you to do it, Mom. You're the one who's been there. Consistently, who's made sacrifices without keeping score. Her voice grew stronger. Dad can still come to the wedding, but I don't want to pretend our relationship is something it's not. Though I felt a surge of honor at her request, my heart ached for what this represented. Her final acknowledgement that the father she'd always hoped for existed only in her childhood dreams. Are you sure, sweetheart? This is a big decision. I've never been more certain of anything, she replied firmly. Now I just have to figure out how to tell him. I suggested she take some time to reflect before making any announcements. Wedding decisions were emotional enough without adding family drama. Jessica agreed, but I could hear in her voice that her mind was made up. The following week brought a flurry of wedding activities, final dress fittings, meetings with the photographer, tastings with the caterer. Through it all, Jessica maintained a determined cheerfulness, though I occasionally caught glimpses of sadness in quiet moments. She still hadn't spoken to Rob about her decision regarding the aisle. Meanwhile, I received an unexpected email from Rob himself, the first direct communication in weeks. Diane, I've sent another payment to Lakeshore Gardens. I trust this resolves any concerns about my commitment to Jessica's wedding. Victoria. And I would like to host a pre-wedding dinner for Jessica, Tyler, and their close friends at our home next Saturday. Please pass along the invitation. Regards, Robert Miller, CEO, MillerTech Solutions. The email was pure Rob, magnanimous on the surface while completely sidestepping his previous failures. No acknowledgement of the partial payment, no mention of when the remaining balance would be covered. And the signature with his title was a new touch, a subtle reminder of his professional success. I forwarded the email to Jessica without comment, letting her draw her own conclusions. She responded within minutes. Seriously? After everything he thinks hosting a dinner absolves him? And notice he didn't even invite you or Hannah to this pre-wedding dinner. Classic Dad, creating a separate event where he gets to play the generous host without addressing the actual commitments he's neglected. I suggested she discuss the invitation with Tyler before making a decision. Navigating family dynamics was part of marriage after all, and Tyler's perspective mattered too. Later that evening, Jessica called to say they had declined the dinner invitation, explaining to Rob that their schedule was already full with wedding preparations. It was a diplomatic response to an offer that felt more like manipulation than genuine generosity. What none of us anticipated was how quickly Rob would escalate the situation. The next day, while teaching my afternoon accounting class, I received multiple text messages from Hannah. Dad just called me furious about Jessica declining his dinner. He said we're turning Jessica against him. Now he's threatening to re-evaluate his financial commitment to the wedding. Mom, this is getting out of control. I stepped out of class during a group exercise to call Hannah, finding her upset but resolute. He's losing it, Mom, she said without preamble. He called me instead of Jessica because he knows she's standing her ground. He tried to get me to convince her that declining his dinner was disrespectful to the father of the bride. What? Did you tell him? That Jessica's wedding isn't about him, and if he wanted respect, he should try giving some first. Hannah's voice held a mixture of pride and apprehension. He didn't like that answer. I'm sure he didn't, I sighed. What exactly did he say about reevaluating his financial commitment? That if Jessica is going to exclude him from pre-wedding celebrations, perhaps he should reconsider how much he contributes. Hannah's tone darkened. It's blackmail, Mom. He's basically saying if Jessica doesn't play along with his Father of the Year routine, he'll punish her financially. After reassuring Hannah that we would handle whatever came next as a family, I returned to my class, mind racing. Rob was escalating precisely because Jessica was asserting boundaries. His tactics were familiar: financial threats followed by wounded innocence when called out on his manipulation. That evening, Jessica called, her voice strained but determined. Dad left me a voicemail about how hurt he is that I declined his dinner. Then he sent an email saying he's reconsidering the financial arrangements for the wedding given my apparent desire for distance. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your father... Don't apologize for him, Mom, she interrupted firmly. I've made a decision. I'm going to tell him this weekend that I want you to walk me down the aisle. I'm done letting his financial manipulation dictate my choices. We talked through how she might approach this conversation, preparing for Rob's likely reactions: hurt, anger, accusations that I had poisoned Jessica against him. Through it all, I was struck by my daughter's clarity and strength. The people-pleasing child who had made excuses for her father's absences and broken promises had grown into a woman who understood her own worth. Saturday arrived, and Jessica met Rob for coffee to share her decision about the wedding ceremony. She had asked to meet him alone, feeling this was a conversation that needed to happen without an audience. 3 hours later, she showed up at my doorstep, eyes red from crying, but posture straight with resolve. It didn't go well, she said simply as she stepped inside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated her college. Acceptance, mourned her first heartbreak, and planned countless family moments. He tried every tactic in his playbook, Jessica recounted. First shock and hurt, then anger. How could I disrespect him this way after all he's done for me? Then financial threats. If I'm cutting him out of his traditional role, perhaps he should withdraw his financial support entirely. My hands clenched around my mug. What did you say? I told him his support has always been conditional, while yours has been consistent. That I'm not cutting him out of the wedding, just being honest about our actual relationship instead of pretending it's something it's not. She took a shaky breath. Then I said if he wants to withdraw his financial support over this, it would only prove my point about how he uses money to control people. Pride swelled in my chest. How did he respond to that? He got very quiet, then very cold. Said he needed to reconsider his position and left. Jessica pushed her hair back from her face, a gesture so reminiscent of her teenage self that my heart ached. On my way home, he texted that he'll still be coming to the wedding and contributing financially, but that I've deeply wounded him, and he hopes someday I'll understand the pain I've caused. Classic Rob, positioning himself as the victim, even as he wielded financial threats as weapons. You've done nothing wrong, I assured her. Setting boundaries isn't causing pain, it's refusing to accept it anymore. The weeks that followed were tense but productive. Jessica and Tyler finalized wedding details with renewed determination. Rob made another partial payment to the venue, but remained elusive about when the balance would be covered. I dipped into my savings to ensure everything proceeded smoothly, not wanting Jessica to worry about finances during this special time. Eleanor Matthews, Tyler's mother, became an unexpected source of strength through it all. During a tasting session with the caterer, she pulled me aside. Tyler told me about Jessica's decision to have you walk her down the aisle, she said quietly. It's the right choice. You're the one who's shown up consistently. I never wanted to come between Jessica and her father, I admitted. Eleanor shook her head firmly. You haven't. Robert did that himself through years of conditional love and financial manipulation. You've just been there to catch Jessica every time he's disappointed her. Her validation meant more than I could express. For so long, I'd carried guilt about the divorce and its impact on my daughters, wondering if I could have done more to preserve their relationship with their father. Eleanor's perspective helped me see that I'd done the best I could with an impossible situation. A week before the wedding, the final venue payment was due. Despite multiple reminders, Rob had yet to cover his remaining balance. I paid it myself, not informing Jessica to avoid adding stress during her final wedding preparations. 2 days later, I received an email from Rob. "Diane, I understand you've covered the remaining venue payment. This was unnecessary and presumptuous. I had a payment plan arranged with Lakeshore Gardens. Nevertheless, I will reimburse you at the rehearsal dinner. Regards, Robert." I nearly laughed out loud at his revisionist history. There had been no payment plan, just his repeated promises and partial fulfillment. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Thursday evening at Giuseppe's Italian restaurant, with Eleanor graciously hosting as tradition dictated. Rob's promise to reimburse me there felt like another performance opportunity, rather than a genuine commitment. The day before the rehearsal dinner, Hannah stopped by my classroom after my final lecture. She perched on the edge of my desk as students filed out, waiting until we were alone to speak. "I found something you should see before tomorrow night," she said, pulling out her phone. "Victoria's been posting about their Nashville expansion again, but this time she included some financial details she probably shouldn't have." She held out her phone, showing me an Instagram post featuring a champagne toast with the caption, "Celebrating MillerTech's biggest quarter ever. 7.2 hours in new contracts this month alone. Nashville office fully funded and ahead of schedule. Business milestones. Proud wife." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Dad's claiming he can't cover $8,000 for Jessica's wedding when his company just brought in over $7 million in new business. And look at the date. This was posted the same day he emailed Jessica about reconsidering his financial commitment." I stared at the post, feeling a familiar mix of anger and resignation. Your father has always compartmentalized money. Business success is his personal achievement, but family obligations are burdens to be minimized. "Well, I'm tired of it," Hannah declared. "Jessica deserves better than his manipulative games during her wedding." "What are you suggesting?" Hannah's expression turned thoughtful. "I'm not sure yet, but I think it's time Dad's financial double life was brought into the open. For Jessica's sake, and for yours, Mom." I touched her arm gently. "This is Jessica's wedding week. Let's not create drama that might overshadow her happiness." Hannah nodded reluctantly. "You're right, but someday he needs to be held accountable." Little did I know how soon someday would arrive. The evening of the rehearsal dinner was unseasonably warm for October. Giuseppe's had decorated their private dining room beautifully, with arrangements of burgundy and blush flowers matching Jessica's wedding colors. Eleanor had thought of every detail, from personalized place cards to thoughtful welcome gifts, for the wedding party. I arrived early to help with final arrangements, wearing a navy blue dress I'd splurged on for wedding festivities, one of few indulgences I'd allowed myself. Jessica and Tyler arrived next, followed by bridesmaids and groomsmen, Hannah, and various family members. Rob and Victoria were the last to arrive, making an entrance that drew all eyes. Victoria wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, while Rob surveyed the room with the satisfied air of someone who expected deference. He greeted Jessica with an elaborate show of fatherly affection, presenting her with an envelope that he announced contained a little something extra for the honeymoon. The moment felt staged, especially when he glanced around to ensure others had noticed his generosity. When he approached me, his smile remained fixed, but his eyes turned cold. "Diane, you look well. Teaching must agree with you." "It does. Thank you." I kept my tone pleasant for Jessica's sake. "I'll catch up with you later about that reimbursement," he said, lowering his voice. "I brought a check." I nodded non-committally, already suspecting that the check would come with conditions or complications. 12 years post-divorce had taught me that Rob's financial promises rarely materialized as stated. The rehearsal went smoothly at the venue earlier that afternoon, with Jessica holding my arm as we practiced walking down the aisle together. Rob had watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. Now, at the dinner, he seemed determined to reassert his importance through carefully timed anecdotes about Jessica's childhood, stories that conspicuously omitted my presence or contributions. After the main course, Eleanor rose to offer a toast, welcoming Jessica to their family with genuine warmth. Other members of the wedding party shared brief, heartfelt wishes for the couple. The atmosphere was joyful and relaxed until Rob stood up, champagne glass in hand. As father of the bride, he began, emphasizing the title, I have the honor of sharing in this milestone moment. His gaze swept the room. Though circumstances have led to some unconventional decisions regarding tomorrow's ceremony, I want everyone to know that I fully support my daughter's happiness. An uncomfortable silence fell. Rob was publicly acknowledging, and subtly, criticizing Jessica's choice to have me walk her down the aisle. His tone suggested magnanimous acceptance of a painful slight rather than respect for her decision. I've always believed in investing in my daughter's future, he continued, which is why I'm proud to have contributed significantly to making this wedding possible, despite some recent business challenges. I felt Jessica stiffen beside me. Hannah, seated across the table, narrowed her eyes. To Jessica and Tyler, Rob concluded, raising his glass higher. May your partnership be equal and supportive in all ways, financially and otherwise. The pointed addition wasn't lost on anyone who knew our history. As conversations resumed, Jessica leaned toward me, whispering, I can't believe he's playing the financial martyr right now. Just let it go, I advised quietly. Tomorrow is your day, not his. The dinner proceeded without further incident until dessert was served. As coffee was being poured, Rob approached my seat, envelope in hand. Diane, do you have a moment to discuss the venue payment? He asked, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby guests. I excused myself and followed him to a quiet corner of the room, aware of Hannah watching us intently. Here's my contribution, Rob said, handing me the envelope. Though I still think you overstepped by making that payment without consulting me. I accepted the envelope without opening it. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate you following through. He wasn't done. I want to be clear that this fulfills all my financial obligations regarding the wedding. Any additional expenses Jessica may have incurred are beyond our original agreement. This was never about the money, I said quietly. It was about honoring commitments to our daughter. His expression hardened. Always the martyr, aren't you, Diane? Playing the devoted mother while painting me as the villain. He lowered his voice further. Did it ever occur to you that my business obligations are what make it possible for me to contribute at all? That the struggling business you and Jessica mock actually faces real cash flow challenges during expansion phases? Something in his defensive tone made me suspicious. I opened the envelope and found not a check, but a promissory note, AIE. Handwritten IOU promising to pay the full amount within 90 days as business conditions allow. After 12 years of similar promises, something inside me broke. The controlled facade I'd maintained for my daughter's sake, the diplomatic responses I'd crafted to minimize conflict, the financial burdens I'd shouldered without complaint, all of it suddenly felt like participation in a destructive charade. This isn't a check, I said, keeping my voice level despite my rising anger. It's another promise with no timeline or accountability. Rob's expression remained smugly superior. It's a formal commitment. My word is good. Your word hasn't been good for 12 years, Rob. Not when it comes to financial responsibilities to your daughters. His face flushed. You have no idea about the pressures of running a successful company while balancing personal obligations. Actually, I do, I replied steadily. I've been balancing a teaching career, mortgage payments, and single parenthood on a fraction of your income. I've never once used cash flow challenges as an excuse to break promises to our daughters. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. MillerTech is in a complex expansion phase. The Nashville office alone requires $14.7 million. I interrupted quietly. Rob blinked. What? Your company was valued at $14.7 million in last quarter's financial reporting. The Nashville expansion is already fully funded, with $7.2 million in new contracts signed this month alone. The figures Hannah had shared were now serving a purpose I hadn't anticipated. So please don't tell me about cash flow challenges when you can't fulfill an $8,000 commitment to your daughter's wedding. Rob's face drained of color, then flushed deep red. You've been investigating my company? That's completely inappropriate and possibly illegal. Public information isn't illegal to access, Robert. MillerTech's success isn't a secret, except when you're using non-existent financial hardship to dodge family obligations. By now, our private conversation had drawn attention. Victoria approached, her hand possessively on Rob's arm. Is everything okay here? Before Rob could answer, Hannah appeared at my side. Dad's just upset because Mom called him out on lying about his company's finances to avoid paying for Jessica's wedding. That's not what happened, Rob said sharply. Your mother is misconstruing. Your company is worth almost $15 million. Hannah interrupted, her voice carrying in the now quiet room. You post record profits on LinkedIn one day and cry poverty to your daughter the next. We're not misconstruing anything. All eyes were now on our corner of the room, including Jessica's. The confrontation I'd hoped to avoid was happening despite my best intentions. This is neither the time nor place, Rob said stiffly, attempting to regain control of the situation. It never is, Jessica said, joining our growing circle. There's never a right time to talk about your financial manipulation, Dad. But since you brought it up at my rehearsal dinner, let's discuss it. Why is Mom holding an IOU instead of a check? The room had gone completely silent. Eleanor stood nearby, concern evident on her face. Tyler moved protectively closer to Jessica. Rob looked around, suddenly aware that he had an audience for a conversation he'd expected to control privately. His expression shifted to one I recognized all too well, the wounded, misunderstood victim. I've always done my best to support this family, even after the divorce, he said, his voice carrying through the quiet room. If my business success makes me a target for resentment, perhaps that says more about others than it does about me. Victoria nodded supportively, but the room remained unconvinced. The gap between Rob's professed financial struggles and the reality of his business success was too obvious to ignore. Jessica took a deep breath. Dad, this isn't about resentment. It's about honesty. You told me you couldn't afford to contribute fully to my wedding because your business was struggling. That wasn't true. Business finances are complicated, Rob began defensively. Temporary liquidity issues during expansion phases. Stop. Jessica's voice was quiet but firm. Just stop. The truth is simple. You chose not to fulfill your commitment to my wedding while simultaneously expanding your company and renovating your vacation home. That was a choice about priorities, not a financial necessity. The naked truth hung in the air, impossible to rationalize away. Rob looked around the room, finding no sympathetic faces. Even Victoria appeared uncomfortable with the public exposure of their financial double life. In that tense silence, I made a decision. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of manipulation, of Rob using financial control to maintain power while shirking responsibility. The time for protecting him from consequences had long passed. Robert's company isn't struggling, I said, my voice steady in the silent room. MillerTech Solutions was valued at $14.7 million last quarter. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. I covered his remaining balance for the venue because he refused to fulfill his commitment, all while opening a new office in Nashville and posting record profits. Rob's face contorted with rage. "You have no right." "I have every right," I countered quietly. "For 12 years, I've watched you use money to control our daughters while I've carried the real financial and emotional burden of parenting. Not anymore." I turned to Jessica, whose eyes shone with unshed tears and fierce pride. "Tomorrow is about celebrating you and Tyler, not about family finances. I just thought everyone should know exactly why I'll be walking you down the aisle. Because showing up consistently matters more than writing checks that never arrive." The rehearsal dinner ended shortly thereafter, with Rob and Victoria making a stilted early departure. As they left, I noticed several guests checking their phones, no doubt looking up MillerTech Solutions and confirming what I'd revealed. Hannah hugged me tightly. "That was long overdue, Mom." Jessica joined our embrace, whispering, "Thank you for finally saying what needed to be said." As the room cleared, Eleanor approached with a gentle smile. "Well, that was quite a rehearsal. Dinner. But I think something important happened here tonight, beyond just exposing financial deception." "What's that?" I asked. "Your daughters saw their mother stand up for herself after years of putting peace before truth." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "That might be the most valuable wedding gift of all." Later that night, alone in my kitchen, I realized Eleanor was right. The truth I'd revealed at the rehearsal dinner wasn't just about Rob's financial manipulations. It was about the cost of maintaining illusions for the sake of others. By confronting Rob publicly, I had shown my daughters that sometimes peace comes not from avoiding conflict, but from facing it with honesty and strength. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Just wanted to say I love you, Mom. Can't wait for you to walk me down the aisle tomorrow. It's always been you." In that moment, I knew that whatever drama had unfolded at the rehearsal dinner, whatever consequences might still come from my public revelation about MillerTech's finances, the most important truth had finally been acknowledged. Love isn't measured in dollars or grand gestures, but in consistent presence through life's hardest moments. Tomorrow, I would walk my daughter down the aisle, not because her father had failed, but because I had succeeded at being the parent she could count on, without conditions or manipulation. And that realization felt like the closing of one chapter, and the beginning of another. Not just for Jessica, but for me as well. The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned clear and bright, with autumn sunshine filtering through the changing leaves around Lakeshore Gardens. I woke early, a mixture of excitement and lingering tension from the previous night's confrontation, swirling in my chest. As I made coffee, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Rob. I hesitated before answering, steeling myself for whatever new drama he might bring to Jessica's special day. "Hello, Robert," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We need to talk about what happened last night," he said without preamble, his tone clipped. "This is Jessica's wedding day. Whatever you have to say can wait until tomorrow." "You publicly humiliated me," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "You disclosed private business information in front of my family and friends." I took a deep breath. "I disclosed factual information that you've been concealing to avoid your financial responsibilities to our daughter. There's a difference." "Where did you even get those valuation figures?" His voice had an edge I recognized, the one that appeared whenever he felt his control slipping. "Have you been investigating my company?" "The information is publicly available, Robert. Your success isn't a secret, except when you're using fictional financial hardship to shirk family obligations." He was silent for a moment. "I've always provided for my daughters. Selectively and conditionally," I corrected him. "Look, I didn't call you out to humiliate you. I did it because your financial manipulation of Jessica needed to stop. She deserves better from her father, especially on her wedding day. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something more calculating. "I'm still walking into that wedding with my head held high, Diane. You may think you've won some kind of victory, but this isn't over." A chill ran through me at his tone. "Don't make this about winning or losing, Rob. It's about our daughter's happiness. Whatever issues exist between us should be put aside today." "Oh, I intend to focus entirely on Jessica today," he replied, an artificial warmth suddenly entering his voice. "In fact, I have a special surprise planned for the reception, something that will make it clear exactly what kind of father I am." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stood in my kitchen, coffee forgotten, wondering what new performance Rob was planning. His surprises had always been carefully crafted to maximize his image while minimizing his actual effort. Whatever he had planned for the reception, I suspected it was designed to reassert his importance after last night's revelations. I pushed the worry aside and focused on preparing for the day ahead. Jessica had asked me to join her and the bridesmaids at the bridal suite at Lakeshore Gardens, where they would be getting ready. I packed my dress, shoes, and accessories, trying to center myself on what truly mattered, supporting my daughter on one of the most significant days of her life. The bridal suite was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Jessica sat in front of a large mirror while a makeup artist worked on her face. Hannah perched nearby, scrolling through music options, and bridesmaids flitted about in matching robes. The atmosphere was light and joyful, with no hint of the previous night's tension. Jessica's face lit up when she saw me. "Mom, perfect timing. We're about to start on hair." I hugged her carefully, mindful of the makeup artist's work. "You look radiant already." For the next few hours, I lost myself in the happy chaos of wedding preparations. Jessica's choice to have me walk her down the aisle meant I was part of both the bridal party preparations and the mother of the bride moments. It was a dual role I embraced wholeheartedly, helping with last-minute details while also taking time to simply watch my daughter transform into a bride. "Are you nervous?" I asked, as the stylist put the finishing touches on Jessica's elegant updo. She met my eyes in the mirror. "About marrying Tyler? Not at all. About the whole wedding production?" "A little." She hesitated. "About Dad's behavior after last night?" "Definitely." I squeezed her shoulder gently. "Whatever happens, this day is about you and Tyler. Everything else is just background noise." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "He called this morning, said he had a special surprise planned for the reception. So he'd called her too." "Did he give any hints?" "No, just that it would make everything clear, whatever that means." She turned to face me directly. "Mom, I don't want any more drama today. Last night was necessary, I think. But today I just want to marry Tyler without family tension overshadowing everything. I promise you, I won't engage with your father about anything controversial today," I assured her. "Whatever his surprise is, we'll handle it with grace." Jessica smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "That's why you're walking me down the aisle. You always know how to put peace above pride when it matters most." Her words touched me deeply, affirming that despite Rob's financial and emotional manipulations over the years, I'd somehow managed to demonstrate healthier values to our daughters. The hours flew by, and soon it was time for the ceremony. As guests were being seated in the garden, Jessica and I waited in a small anteroom. She looked breathtaking in her gown, an A-line silhouette with delicate lace detailing that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. "You are the most beautiful bride," I said, feeling tears threatening to spill. "Tyler is going to be speechless." Jessica squeezed my hands. "Mom, I need to say something before we go out there." Her eyes were bright with emotion. "Thank you for everything, not just today, but for all the years you've put Hannah and me first, for finishing your degree while working and raising us, for never missing a school event even when you were exhausted, for showing us what real strength looks like." My carefully applied makeup was in serious jeopardy now. "Jessica? No, let me finish," she insisted gently. "Last night, when you finally stood up to Dad about the money, that wasn't just about the wedding payments. It was about years of watching him devalue your contributions while you stayed quiet for our sake. I want you to know that Hannah and I always saw the truth, even when we were too young to fully understand it." The tears I'd been holding back spilled over. "I never wanted to turn you against your father." "You didn't," she said firmly. "His own actions did that. What you did was model integrity, even when it would have been easier to fight fire with fire." She smiled through her own tears. "That's the legacy I'm carrying forward in my marriage to Tyler. Not financial manipulation or power games, but honesty and partnership." We embraced carefully, mindful of our dresses and makeup. A gentle knock at the door signaled it was time. The wedding coordinator peeked in, smiling at our tearful moment. "They're ready for you," she said softly. "The guests are seated, and the music is about to change for your entrance." Jessica took a deep breath, composing herself. "Let's do this." As we stepped into position at the back of the garden, I caught sight of Rob sitting in the front row, beside Victoria. His face was carefully composed, giving away nothing of his earlier phone call or promised surprise. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Then the music changed, and all other thoughts vanished as Jessica took my arm. We began the walk down the aisle, moving slowly between rows of smiling guests. Tyler stood beneath the flower-adorned arbor, his face transforming with wonder as he caught sight of Jessica. In that moment, watching my daughter walk toward the man who clearly adored her, a man who respected her as an equal partner, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was the true measure of parental success, raising a child who recognized healthy love and had the courage to choose it. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Jessica and Tyler had written their own vows, each promising not grand romantic gestures, but daily acts of respect and support. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. As the newlyweds made their way back up the aisle, their faces alight with joy, I caught Hannah's eye from across the garden. She gave me a small smile and a thumbs up. The cocktail hour passed in a blur of congratulations and photographs. Rob maintained a polite distance, playing the gracious father of the bride to anyone who would listen, while carefully avoiding direct interaction with me. I kept my promise to Jessica, focusing on celebrating rather than continuing last night's confrontation. As guests began moving into the reception tent, I found myself beside Eleanor Matthews. She linked her arm through mine companionately. "That was a beautiful ceremony," she said. "You did a wonderful job walking her down the aisle." "Thank you," I replied. "For that, and for hosting such a lovely rehearsal dinner, despite the unexpected drama." Eleanor waved away my thanks. Family dynamics are always complicated. What matters is that Jessica and Tyler are starting their marriage surrounded by love and truth. She glanced toward where Rob stood chatting with distant relatives. "Has he mentioned anything about this surprise he's planning?" So word had spread about that too. "No details, just vague warnings. I'm trying not to worry about it." "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," Eleanor said firmly, reminding me that I had allies in this new extended family. The reception began with dinner, followed by heartfelt toasts from Hannah as maid of honor and Tyler's best friend as best man. Rob sat at a prominent table near the newlyweds, occasionally leaning over to speak to Jessica with an exaggerated display of fatherly affection that made my stomach clench. He was rebuilding his narrative in real time, working to counter last night's revelations with a performance of devoted fatherhood. After the meal, the DJ announced the first dance. Jessica and Tyler moved to the center of the dance floor, swaying to the music with their foreheads touching, lost in their own world. My heart swelled watching them, so clearly grounded in genuine partnership. When the father-daughter dance was announced, Rob moved to the dance floor with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. This traditional moment had been preserved despite Jessica's decision about the aisle, a compromise she'd made to maintain peace. As they danced, I could see Rob speaking intently to Jessica, who maintained a polite smile even as her posture grew increasingly tense. Hannah slid into the chair beside me. "Dad's working overtime on damage control," she murmured. "He's telling everyone who'll listen that his business is indeed successful, but that family matters are complex, and some people misunderstand financial responsibilities. Let him spin whatever story makes him feel better," I replied. "Today isn't about setting the record straight." Hannah gave me a searching look. "You know, for years I watched you let Dad rewrite history without challenging him. I used to think it was weakness, but now I understand. It was strength. You were playing the long game for us." Before I could respond, the dance ended and Rob escorted Jessica back to her seat. Instead of returning to his own table, however, he stopped beside the DJ booth, whispering something to the coordinator. My anxiety spiked as the DJ nodded and handed Rob a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rob's voice echoed through the tent, commanding immediate attention. "If I could have everyone's attention for a special moment." Jessica looked at me across the room, concern evident in her expression. I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile as Rob continued. "As many of you know, Jessica has always been my pride and joy. From the moment she was born, I knew she was destined for greatness." His voice carried the practiced charm that had once convinced me to put my own ambitions on hold for his. Watching her grow into the accomplished woman she is today has been the greatest privilege of my life. I maintained a neutral expression, though internally I was cataloging the countless school events, parent-teacher conferences, and milestone moments Rob had missed while building his business empire. Some of you may have heard certain discussions at last night's rehearsal dinner regarding financial matters. Rob's tone shifted subtly, an undercurrent of defensiveness emerging. "I want to address that directly, because family is more important than money." The tent grew uncomfortably quiet as guests exchanged glances. This was clearly not the typical wedding reception speech. "Success in business has blessed me with the ability to support my family in ways my own parents couldn't," Rob continued. "But true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments like these, watching my daughter begin her own family journey." He paused, scanning the room with the air of someone building to an important announcement. "Which is why I've prepared a special gift to demonstrate exactly what kind of father I am." My hands tightened around my napkin as Rob reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. The resemblance to last night's IOU was not lost on me, but this envelope was thicker, more substantial. "Jessica and Tyler," he said, turning toward the couple. "I know you've been saving for your first home together. Today, I'm proud to present you with this." He handed the envelope to Jessica, who opened it with visible trepidation. Her eyes widened as she examined the contents, then looked up at her father in shock. "This is a deed," she said, her voice barely audible despite the microphone Rob still held near them. "Not just any deed," Rob announced proudly to the assembled guests. "The deed to a lakefront property in Lake Geneva. Your very own vacation. Home, fully paid for, as my wedding gift to you both." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the tent. A vacation home was an extravagant gift by any standard, and a calculated public statement after last night's revelations about MillerTech's finances. Because family has always been my highest priority," Rob continued, his eyes briefly finding mine across the room, a hint of triumph in his gaze. "Nothing matters more than providing for those you love." The message was unmistakable. "See, I'm not the financially neglectful father you painted me as. I'm generous and successful. The fact that he'd withheld his promised contribution to the wedding itself while preparing this grand gesture was the perfect encapsulation of Rob's approach to parenting, prioritizing dramatic displays of wealth over reliable support. Jessica maintained her composure admirably, thanking her father with a gracious smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Tyler shook Rob's hand, looking slightly dazed by the unexpected gift. As applause filled the tent, I caught Hannah's gaze. She rolled, her eyes slightly, seeing through the performance as clearly as I did. When Rob finally relinquished the microphone, returning to his seat beside a beaming Victoria, the reception resumed its normal flow. The band started playing, couples moved to the dance floor, and conversations gradually shifted away from Rob's extravagant gift. Eleanor appeared at my side, a glass of wine in each hand. She offered one to me with a knowing look. Well, that was quite a performance. Classic Robert, I said, accepting the wine gratefully. Maximum visibility, minimum accountability. A vacation home instead of fulfilling his basic commitment to the wedding itself. Eleanor shook her head. It's not about what Jessica and Tyler need. It's about making a statement. A very calculated one, I agreed, sipping my wine. He's rewriting last night's narrative. Now, instead of being exposed as financially manipulative, he's the magnanimous father giving his daughter a property worth hundreds of thousands. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. You don't seem as upset as I expected. I considered this, watching Jessica and Tyler on the dance floor, surrounded by friends. I think I've finally accepted who Robert is and who he isn't. The grand gestures, the public performances of generosity, the strategic displays of wealth, they're all part of his identity, but they don't change the day-to-day reality of his parenthood. And what reality is that? Eleanor asked. Inconsistency, I said simply. He's a father of moments, not the everyday kind. He shows up for photographs and milestones with gifts and speeches, but disappears when it comes to the mundane support that actually builds trust. As if confirming my assessment, I noticed Rob already gathering his things, preparing for an early departure despite the reception being far from over. Another classic move, make a splashy appearance, deliver a memorable moment, then exit, before being required to engage in the less glamorous aspects of family celebration. Before Rob and Victoria could slip away, Jessica intercepted them. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could read the body language. Jessica's earnest expression, Rob's performative embrace, Victoria's restless glances toward the exit. After a brief exchange, they departed, leaving Jessica standing alone. For a moment before Tyler joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist and whispering something that made her smile. Later, as the reception was winding down, Jessica found me sitting at a quiet table, taking a moment to rest my feet and observe the celebration. Mind if I join you? She asked, slipping into the chair beside me. Despite hours of dancing and socializing, she still looked radiant. It's your wedding, I teased. You can sit wherever you want. She laughed, then her expression grew more serious. So, Dad's big surprise. Quite a statement, I acknowledged carefully. It's completely over the top and totally unnecessary, Jessica said, shaking her head. Tyler and I have been saving for a starter home in Evanston, a vacation property in Lake Geneva. We can't even afford the property taxes. This was exactly the kind of practical consideration that would never occur to Rob, who viewed gifts as symbols rather than thoughtful responses to actual needs. I'm sure your father thought he was being generous, I offered, keeping my promise to maintain peace. Jessica gave me a knowing look. Mom, you don't have to defend him. We both know what that gift was really about, making a public statement after last night. She twisted her new wedding ring absently. The irony is, if he'd just fulfilled his original commitment to the wedding without drama, last night never would have happened. Your father has always had his own approach to family obligations, I said diplomatically. That's one way to put it, Jessica smiled wryly. Anyway, Tyler and I have decided to thank him for the gesture but suggest he sell the property and use part of the proceeds to actually fulfill his wedding contribution. The rest he can put in trusts for future grandchildren's education or something else useful. I couldn't hide my surprise. You're refusing the vacation home? We're suggesting a more practical alternative, she corrected, one that honors his original commitment first and foremost. She reached for my hand. I learned that from you, you know. The importance of fulfilling promises before making grand gestures. Pride swelled in my chest at her wisdom and maturity. Your father may not take that suggestion well. Probably not, she agreed, but it's not my job to manage his feelings anymore. That's another lesson I've learned watching you rebuild your life these past years. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the remaining guests on the dance floor. Hannah was showing Tyler's cousins some dance move, laughing as they tried to copy her. Do you regret it? Jessica asked suddenly. Standing up to Dad last night? I considered the question seriously. No. I regret that it had to happen at your rehearsal dinner, but not the act itself. Sometimes truth needs to be spoken, even when it's uncomfortable. Well, I'm glad you did, Jessica said firmly. It was like watching the final piece of a puzzle fall into place. All these years of watching Dad manipulate situations with money, of seeing you carry the real weight of parenting while he swooped in for the glory moments. It all crystallized when you finally called him out. She looked around the beautiful reception, at the flowers and lights that transformed the tent into a magical space. This wedding happened because you made it happen, Mom. Not just financially, but emotionally. You're the one who taught me what a healthy relationship looks. Like, even though you had to learn it the hard way, emotions welled up inside me. Pride in the strong, clear-eyed woman my daughter had become, gratitude for her recognition, and a sense of closure that had been 12 years in the making. I made plenty of mistakes, I admitted. But you learned from them, Jessica countered. And you made sure Hannah and I learned too. That's real parenting. Tyler approached, extending his hand to his new wife. May I steal my bride for another dance? Jessica stood, leaning down to kiss my cheek before joining her husband. Thank you for everything, Mom. Not just today, but always. As I watched them return to the dance floor, I reflected on the journey that had led to this moment. 12 years ago, when Rob left for Victoria, I'd felt like a failure. Professionally sidelined, financially vulnerable, emotionally devastated. I'd believed Rob's narrative that my contributions to our family were less valuable than his, that his business success somehow entitled him to rewrite the terms of our relationship. Today, watching Jessica begin her marriage with clear eyes and strong boundaries, I finally recognized the true success of my parenting. Despite Rob's financial manipulations and inconsistent presence, both my daughters had developed healthy perspectives on relationships, money, and self-worth. They could recognize Rob's gift for what it was, a performance of generosity designed to serve his own image rather than meet their actual needs. Eleanor joined me again, following my gaze to Jessica and Tyler on the dance floor. You've raised an extraordinary young woman, she said warmly. Tyler tells me she's just like her mother, brilliant, principled, and stronger than she knows. I hope I've given her a better roadmap than I had, I replied. Especially about money and power, in relationships. Oh, I'd say you've done that and more, Eleanor smiled. Last night when you finally called out Robert's financial games, Jessica whispered to Tyler, "That's who I want to be at 50, someone who speaks truth even when it's hard." Her words touched something deep inside me, the realization that my journey from Rob's bookkeeper to independent professional hadn't just secured my own future. It had shown my daughters a different path, one where personal worth wasn't determined by financial leverage or another person's validation. As the wedding festivities continued around me, I felt a profound sense of peace. Rob's grand gesture with the vacation home hadn't overshadowed the day as he'd intended. Instead, it had simply confirmed what Jessica already knew, that genuine support can't be replaced by intermittent extravagance, and that real parenting happens in the daily choices to show up consistently, not in splashy demonstrations designed for public consumption. The revelation about MillerTech's true worth hadn't just exposed Rob's financial manipulation, it had broken the final chains of self-doubt that had lingered since our divorce. I was no longer the woman who questioned her value because her ex-husband controlled the narrative. I was Diane Miller, accounting professor, mother of 2 remarkable daughters, and a woman who had finally learned that her worth had never been determined by Rob's assessment in the first place. As the evening drew to a close, with Jessica and Tyler preparing for their grand exit through an archway of sparklers, Hannah appeared at my side. She linked her arm through mine, resting her head briefly on my shoulder. "We did it, Mom," she said simply. "Got Jess married without any major catastrophes." I laughed softly. "Despite your father's best efforts to make it about him." "That vacation house move was so transparent," Hannah scoffed. "Jess already told me they're going to suggest he sell it." "She mentioned that," I confirmed. "Your sister has become quite wise about seeing through grand gestures to the reality beneath." Hannah squeezed my arm. "We both have, thanks to you." She straightened up, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Though, I have to admit, watching Dad's face when you revealed MillerTech's actual valuation last night was pretty satisfying." Despite my best efforts to maintain the high road, I couldn't suppress a smile. "It was a long time coming." 12 years, Hannah agreed. "But worth the wait." As we joined the line of guests preparing to send off the newlyweds, sparklers in hand, I reflected on Hannah's words. Some revelations did indeed take time, whether about a company's true financial worth or about one's own value beyond balance, sheets and bank accounts. Jessica and Tyler ran through the sparkler-lit pathway, laughing as they headed toward their waiting car. My daughter's face was alight with genuine joy, unburdened by the financial tensions that had threatened to overshadow her wedding. In that moment of pure celebration, I knew that the truth, however uncomfortable or untimely, had been the greatest gift I could have given her. Not a lakefront property or a grand gesture, but the simple, powerful knowledge that she deserved. Honesty, consistency, and respect in all her relationships, starting with the one she had with her parents. As the newlyweds' car pulled away, guests began dispersing, the magical evening drawing to a close. I found myself standing beside Eleanor again, both of us watching the taillights disappear down the winding drive of Lakeshore Gardens. "What a day?" she sighed contentedly. "Despite everything, it turned out beautifully." "It did," I agreed. "Jessica and Tyler are starting their marriage with eyes wide open and hearts full. That's all any parent could hope for." Eleanor studied me with genuine warmth. "You know, Diane, I've been watching you navigate Robert's antics with remarkable grace. Lesser women would have matched his machinations with their own, especially after last night's revelations. Instead, you've consistently chosen the higher path." "Not always gracefully," I admitted. "There were years when I swallowed my pride to keep the peace, times when I should have stood up sooner." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged. "But you found your voice when it mattered most. When your daughters needed to see that financial manipulation isn't something to be tolerated, even from family." As we walked toward the parking area, the October night crisp around us, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me since the divorce. Not because Rob had finally acknowledged his financial games, he never would, but because I no longer needed that acknowledgement to validate my own worth or contributions. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said as we reached our cars. "Rob's grand gesture with the vacation house actually proved my point from last night. He had the resources all along. He just chose not to use them for his promised contribution to the wedding." Eleanor laughed softly. "Men like Robert never see the..." Irony in their own actions. They're too busy rewriting the narrative to serve their interests. True enough, I agreed. But Jessica and Hannah see it clearly now, and that's what matters. We embraced warmly before heading to our separate vehicles. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I reflected on the journey that had led me from Rob's shadow to this moment of clarity and peace. The revelation at the rehearsal dinner hadn't just been about MillerTech's valuation. It had been about my own worth, finally recognized not just by others, but by myself. When I arrived home, the house was quiet, but not empty feeling as it sometimes had been after the girls moved out. Instead, it felt like a space filled with possibility and independence, much like the life I'd rebuilt after Rob left. I kicked off my heels, made a cup of tea, and settled onto my back porch, looking up at the stars that had witnessed both my struggles and triumphs over the years. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Just checking into the hotel. Today was perfect, Mom. Thank you for everything, especially for walking me down the aisle. It meant more than you'll ever know. Love you." As I typed my reply, I realized that the greatest revelation of all hadn't happened at the rehearsal dinner or even at today's wedding. It had been building slowly over 12 years of single parenthood, financial rebuilding, and educational reinvention. The truth that had finally emerged wasn't just about MillerTech's hidden millions. It was about the immeasurable value of integrity, consistency, and courage in the face of manipulation. Some lessons cost dearly, but teach priceless wisdom. Mine had cost a marriage, but taught me, and more importantly, my daughters, that our worth was never determined by anyone else's balance sheet in the first place. The Sunday after Jessica's wedding, I woke to sunshine streaming through my bedroom window and the unusual luxury of nowhere to be. No venue coordinators to call, no last-minute details to handle, no financial gymnastics to perform, just quiet possibility stretching before me like an empty canvas. I made coffee and carried it to my back porch, a simple pleasure I'd rarely had time for during the wedding preparations. The morning air held that perfect autumn crispness, leaves beginning to turn gold at the edges of my small yard. As I sipped my coffee, I reflected on how much had changed in just one weekend. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Brunch at Morning Brew in an hour? Eleanor's in town one more day and wants to see us." I texted back my acceptance, feeling a warm appreciation for the bond that had formed with Tyler's mother. Eleanor Matthews had become more than an in-law. She was an ally, and increasingly, a friend. Someone who understood the complexities of raising children alone while rebuilding a career. At the cafe, Hannah was already seated with Eleanor when I arrived. They were laughing about something, heads bent together like old friends despite the generation gap between them. "There she is," Eleanor said warmly as I approached. "The woman of the hour." "Hardly," I demurred, sliding into a chair. "That would be Jessica, who is currently on a plane to Belize with her husband," Hannah reminded us. "So you're the next best thing." We ordered, Eleanor insisted on treating, and settled into conversation about the wedding. The beautiful ceremony, the delicious food, the perfect weather. For a while, we carefully avoided mentioning Rob's dramatic gift or my confrontation at the rehearsal dinner, focusing instead on the positive memories. Finally, Eleanor broached the subject we'd been dancing around. "Have you heard from Robert? Since the reception?" I shook my head. Radio silence, which is his typical pattern after being called out on his behavior. He'll reappear when he has a new narrative constructed. "Dad texted me this morning," Hannah said, surprising me. Asked if I'd heard from Jess and Tyler about the vacation house. I told him they're on their honeymoon and probably not thinking about real estate. "He's already looking for validation of his grand gesture," I observed. Typical Rob. Can't stand not being immediately acknowledged for his generosity. Eleanor stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You know, Watching this situation unfold has been quite educational for me. My late husband was nothing like Robert. He was a high school science teacher who clipped coupons and drove the same car for 15 years. But he was always present for Tyler in ways that mattered. That's what counts, I agreed. Consistency over flash. Still, Eleanor continued, I've known women in situations similar to yours. Professionally sidelined during marriage, financially, vulnerable after divorce, rebuilding from scratch while the ex-husband maintained lifestyle and status. Hannah leaned forward. Mom never talks about the early days after the divorce. How bad was it really? I hesitated, not wanting to burden my daughter with painful history. But she was an adult now, and perhaps understanding the full story would help her navigate her own future relationships. It was challenging, I admitted. Your father controlled all the financial accounts during our marriage. When he left, I had to start from zero. No recent work history, an unfinished degree, and 2 teenage daughters to support. But you never let us feel it, Hannah said softly. We still did our activities, had birthday parties, went on small vacations. Because I worked 3 jobs while finishing my degree, I explained. Bookkeeping during the day, retail on weekends, online data entry at night after you girls were asleep. Eleanor nodded in recognition. The invisible labor that makes children's lives stable during upheaval. Meanwhile, Dad was posting photos from Aspen with Victoria. Hannah remembered, her expression darkening. I never put it together until I was older. How he always had money for luxury while claiming business challenges whenever you asked for help with our expenses. The conversation paused as our food arrived. As we began eating, I realized how rarely I had allowed myself to acknowledge the full reality of those difficult years. I had been so focused on moving forward, on creating stability for my daughters, that I'd hardly processed my own experience. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle, I found myself saying. It was watching Rob rewrite our history, claiming he built MillerTech single-handedly when I was there working alongside him in the early years, handling the books while caring for a newborn. That's why last night's revelation was so powerful, Eleanor said. You finally reclaimed your narrative. Hannah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. You know what I remember from those early years after the divorce? You sitting at the kitchen table with textbooks after we went to bed. You highlighting pages while balancing checkbooks. You never missing my soccer games even though I know now you must have been exhausted. Her words touched something deep. Within me, the acknowledgement that my efforts, though often invisible compared to Rob's grand gestures, had been seen and valued by the people who mattered most. Your mom is remarkable, Eleanor agreed. Building a new career in her 40s while raising 2 daughters alone isn't just impressive, it's heroic. I felt my cheeks warm at their praise. I did what I had to do. Many women face the same challenges. True, Eleanor acknowledged, but not all of them transform themselves from financially dependent spouse to accounting professor teaching others about financial literacy and empowerment. That's the part that makes your story special, Diane. As our conversation continued, I realized that Eleanor was right. My journey hadn't just been about survival after divorce. It had been about reclaiming my voice, my professional identity, and ultimately, my financial power. The revelation at Jessica's rehearsal dinner hadn't been an impulsive act of revenge. It had been the final step in a 12-year journey toward truth. After brunch, Hannah headed off to meet friends, while Eleanor and I decided to take a walk along the lakefront. The October day had warmed beautifully, with sailboats dotting the horizon and families enjoying what might be one of the last pleasant weekends before winter. Tyler tells me you're considering teaching a community workshop on financial literacy. For women, Eleanor said as we strolled. Just an idea I've been playing with, I admitted. So many women, especially those going through divorce, don't understand the financial systems designed to disadvantage them. I'd like to change that. You should do it, Eleanor encouraged. Your experience gives you credibility that goes beyond academic qualifications. You've lived it. I smiled, warming to the subject. I've started outlining topics, understanding credit scores, negotiating financial settlements, rebuilding career credentials after gaps for childcare, recognizing financial manipulation in relationships. That last one hits close to home, I imagine. It took me years to recognize Rob's patterns, I acknowledged. The selective financial transparency, the claims of business hardship whenever family obligations arose, the extravagant gifts designed to create the appearance of generosity while basic commitments went unfulfilled. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, the vacation home being the perfect example. Exactly. A grand gesture that makes him look generous to outsiders while avoiding the actual commitment he made to the wedding itself. I shook my head. Classic Rob, creating a narrative of exceptional generosity to distract from consistent irresponsibility. We paused, watching a sail catch the wind and billow outward, carrying its boat farther into the lake. Have you ever thought about writing about your experiences? Eleanor asked suddenly. Not just teaching workshops, but creating a resource for women in similar situations? The idea caught me by surprise. Writing? I'm not a writer. You're a teacher, Eleanor pointed out. And the best teachers are those who can translate complex information into accessible wisdom. Your story, financial manipulation in marriage, rebuilding after divorce, reclaiming professional identity, could help countless women recognize patterns in their own relationships before it's too late. Her suggestion planted a seed I couldn't immediately dismiss. Throughout my accounting courses, I'd often used personal anecdotes to illustrate financial concepts, finding that real-world examples helped students connect with otherwise dry material. Perhaps my experience could serve a purpose beyond my own growth. I wouldn't even know where to begin, I said, though part of me was already considering possibilities. Start with what you wish someone had told you, Eleanor suggested. The warning signs you missed, the questions you should have asked, the boundaries you wish you'd established earlier. As we continued our walk, the conversation shifted to Jessica and Tyler's honeymoon, Eleanor's interior design business, and Hannah's plans after graduation. But Eleanor's suggestion lingered in my mind, taking root alongside the other new beginnings that seemed to be emerging in the aftermath of Jessica's wedding. The following week brought an unexpected development. I was preparing for my afternoon accounting class when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Diane Miller?" asked an unfamiliar male voice when I answered. "Yes, it is." "This is James Whitaker from the Chicago Business Journal. I'm writing a piece on women rebuilding careers after divorce, and your name came up as someone with a particularly compelling story." I blinked in surprise. "May I ask who referred you to me?" "Eleanor Matthews mentioned you during an interview about women entrepreneurs. She was one of our profiles last month and suggested you might be willing to share your experience transitioning from corporate bookkeeper to accounting professor after your divorce." So Eleanor had been serious about spreading my story. I felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of discussing my personal life publicly, especially given Rob's prominence in Chicago business circles. Then again, the truth about MillerTech's finances was already out there among those who attended the wedding. Perhaps there was value in sharing my experience more broadly. "I'd be open to discussing it," I said cautiously, though I should mention that my ex-husband is Robert Miller of MillerTech Solutions. "I'm aware," James replied, his tone suggesting this connection made the story more interesting, not less. "Mrs. Matthews mentioned the education gap many women face when leaving marriages, where they've been financially dependent. Your perspective as both someone who experienced this and now teaches financial literacy could be valuable to our readers." We arranged to meet later that week for an interview. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, processing this unexpected turn of events. For years, I'd focused on moving forward quietly, rebuilding my life without confrontation or public discussion of my marriage. Now, within the span of a few days, I had publicly revealed Rob's financial manipulation and was considering sharing my full story with a business publication. Was I ready for this level of visibility? For the potential backlash from Rob? For becoming a public example rather than a private success story? My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. "Mom, just got a job interview with Barrett Financial." They were impressed by my corporate valuation project on MillerTech. I smiled at the irony. Hannah's academic research into her father's company, the same research that had armed me with information for the rehearsal dinner confrontation, was now opening professional doors for her. The truth, long suppressed for the sake of peace, was creating unexpected opportunities for both of us. That evening, I opened my laptop and began typing, not for the interview or for any audience, but for myself. I wrote about meeting Rob in accounting school, about the early days of MillerTech when we worked side by side in our spare bedroom, about the gradual shift as the company grew, with Rob increasingly positioning himself as the sole architect, of its success while I was relegated to supportive wife status, about the financial awakening that came with divorce, the shocking discovery of how vulnerable I had become despite my accounting background. The words flowed more easily than I expected, years of unspoken truths finding their way onto the page. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I had the beginnings of something that felt important. Not just a personal catharsis, but potentially a roadmap for other women navigating similar terrain. 2 weeks later, my interview appeared in the Chicago Business Journal under the headline, "From Financial Dependency to Empowerment: One Woman's Journey After Corporate Divorce." The article told my story with sensitivity and nuance, focusing on the professional rebuild rather than personal grievances. I discussed the challenges of returning to school in midlife, the barriers women face when re-entering the workforce after career gaps, and the financial literacy gap that leaves many women vulnerable in divorce. Although Rob was mentioned only in passing, the timing of the article, so soon after Jessica's wedding, made the connections obvious to anyone familiar with both families. I braced myself for his angry response, for accusations that I was publicly undermining him or seeking revenge. Instead, there was silence. No calls, no texts, no legal threats. Just the quiet aftermath of truth, finally spoken aloud. The article generated unexpected attention. I received emails from women in similar situations, thanking me for articulating experiences they had struggled to name. The community college where I taught asked if I would develop a continuing education course on financial literacy for women, separate from my regular accounting classes. A local women's shelter invited me to speak about recognizing financial manipulation in relationships. It was Eleanor who helped me see the pattern emerging. Over lunch, a month after Jessica's wedding, she pointed out what I had been too close to recognize. "You're becoming an advocate," she said simply. "The professor who helps students understand balance sheets has become the woman who helps others balance their lives after financial trauma." "That seems a bit dramatic," I protested. "I'm just sharing what I've learned." Eleanor shook her head. What happened at Jessica's rehearsal dinner wasn't just about exposing Robert's lies about his company's worth. It was about you finally recognizing your own worth, professionally, personally, and yes, financially. Her words resonated deeply. For years, I had measured my success in small personal milestones, completing my degree, securing a teaching position, paying off my mortgage. I had never considered that my journey might have value beyond my own family circle. As autumn deepened into early winter, I found myself embracing this new identity. The financial literacy workshop I developed became one of the most popular continuing education offerings at the college, with a waiting list for the next session. I started a blog sharing practical advice for women rebuilding financial independence after divorce. Hannah jokingly called me the accidental guru of post-divorce finances, but there was pride in her voice when she said it. The final piece fell into place in December when Jessica and Tyler returned from an extended honeymoon that had included both Belize and a tour of European Christmas markets. They invited Hannah and me to dinner at their apartment, eager to share photos and stories from their travels. Over dessert, Jessica brought up what I had been curious about but hesitant to ask. So, about Dad's vacation house gift. I set down my fork. You don't have to tell me if you'd rather not. No, I want to, Jessica insisted. Tyler and I met with Dad last week to discuss it. We thanked him for the gesture, but explained that a vacation property doesn't align with our current priorities. We suggested he sell it and use part of the proceeds to fulfill his original wedding contribution, with the remainder going toward a college fund for future grandchildren. How did he take it? I asked, imagining Rob's reaction to having his grand gesture declined. Jessica and Tyler exchanged glances. Not well initially, Tyler admitted. He seemed genuinely shocked that we wouldn't want a vacation home. That's because to Dad, assets equal success, Hannah interjected. He can't fathom someone prioritizing financial stability over status symbols. Jessica nodded. After the initial shock wore off, he went into businessman mode, talking about property, appreciation, and investment value. When that didn't persuade us, he finally asked why we were declining such a generous gift. What did you tell him? I asked. The truth, Jessica said simply. That we're focused on building our primary home and careers right now, and that we'd rather see his contribution go toward the commitments he already made, rather than new grand gestures. I couldn't help but admire her directness, a quality I had taken decades to develop in my own dealings with Rob. The interesting part, Tyler added, was what happened next. After some back and forth, he actually agreed to sell the property. He seemed almost relieved, like maintaining the image of the generous father was exhausting even for him. Jessica reached for my hand across the table. I also told him I'd read your interview in the business journal, that it helped me understand patterns I'd never been able to name before. I felt a momentary pang of guilt. I never intended to damage your relationship with your father. You didn't, Jessica assured me. If anything, you've made it possible for me to have a more honest relationship with him. I told Dad I don't need grand gestures. I just need consistency and transparency. The same things you've been asking for all these years. As the evening continued, with Hannah teasing Tyler about his honeymoon sunburn, and Jessica showing us photos of European Christmas markets, I found myself observing my family with new eyes. My daughters had grown into women who could recognize manipulation and stand firm against it, even from their father. They had developed financial literacy and independence that I had lacked at their age. They understood their own worth in a way that couldn't be undermined by anyone, not even Rob with his millions and grand gestures. This, I realized, was the true revelation that had begun at Jessica's rehearsal dinner. Not just that MillerTech Solutions was worth $14.7 million, but that my daughters and I had built something far more valuable. Lives founded on truth, consistent support, and genuine partnership rather than financial manipulation and control. As I drove home that night, snow beginning to dust the suburban streets of Chicago, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. 12 years ago, I had been a newly divorced woman with an unfinished degree, teenage daughters, and profound financial insecurity. Today, I was Professor Miller, financial literacy advocate, mother of 2 remarkable women, and finally, after decades of allowing others to define my value, the author of my own worth. The revelation at Jessica's wedding had been just the beginning. The real transformation had been happening all along, in the quiet choices to rebuild, to teach, to speak truth even when silence seemed safer. And now, in the aftermath of that public moment of truth, I was discovering that my voice had power beyond anything I had imagined. The power to help other women recognize their own worth before spending decades doubting it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.